All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to this presentation. And let's make your TV apps accessible and compliant. My name is Daniel Göransson, and I am an accessibility specialist. I've been doing this for 14 or so years, and I've been helping a lot of different clients that work with TV apps and other products, and basically all over the world. So this is my passion for sure. And what are TV apps? Well, to me, TV apps are like streaming services when you can watch, where you can watch TV shows and movies. And these kind of TV apps exist in many different platforms. Many have a website, some have mobile applications like on iOS and Android, and some have apps on TV set-top boxes like Apple TV, Google TV Streamer, and some also have on smart TV devices. And all of these apps now have to be accessible according to the European Accessibility Act. And we will talk more about the law later in the presentation. But it's also very, very important to let everyone be able to watch TV and movies, because it's such a big part of the social environment, I guess. So everyone, no matter if they have a disability or not, to be able to talk about like the latest TV show and things like that. And that's why I'm doing this presentation, because of selfish reasons. Because me myself have a visual impairment. My doctor says I only see 1%. And I usually get the question, can blind people see TV, watch TV? Well, the answer is yes, and I will get to how that works in just a minute. But let me explain. It's so important for people with disabilities like me to be able to watch TV, because, you know, people with disabilities usually have it more difficult to be in a social environment or get friends and all of that. So if people can watch TV, that's something you can talk about. And, you know, I'm such a nerd, so I love to go to conventions and things like that and talk about Star Wars. And if I wasn't able to watch Star Wars, I wouldn't be able to talk about it, right? So that's why that's important. And one way to consume content is by using something called audio description. And what's audio description? Well, it's basically someone that narrates what's happening on the screen. What's happening visually on the screen, someone with a voice, you know, can narrate and explain that to me when I'm watching. And usually that's a separate track. You can activate different languages and subtitles and things like that. And in that list, there's usually something called audio description. And yeah, let's take a listen on how that can be. I have a demo here, and we get a couple of seconds with the screen being black here, and just a voice narrating the scene, and then we'll see what's happening at the same time as the narration goes.
He raises his head and batters open the door. 4 startled Russians leap to the fight. Matt kicks and punches his way through them, and the door shuts behind him. The hallway is empty again. The Russian from the card game is thrown through the door, collapsing it against the opposite wall. The other door opens, and the apple-eating man rushes up, only to be hit by a flying microwave oven.
Right, so that was from the show Daredevil, 10 years ago now. That was released on Netflix. So hope you understood like what the narration did there. It explained to me everything, because that scene is basically no dialogue. It's only a fight scene. But I could understand what's happening by just listening to the narration. So that's awesome. I said I have 1% vision, and yeah, what does that mean? You know, blindness is a spectrum, and I usually get another question. I thought blind people can't see at all. It's a common one I get, but remember, it is a spectrum. So some can see a little bit, some can, you know, maybe not see at all, and so on. So it is a bit of a spectrum. But most of us have difficulty reading and finding the content in the TV apps because of, we have to navigate and read the text and so on in these apps. So we use an assistive technology, an application called Screen Reader. And screen readers basically reads text, buttons, and images for us so we know what's on the screen. And these kind of applications are built in to all the different devices. So it's on your computer, it's on your phone, and even on TV set-top boxes like Apple TV and Google TV Streamer, and even on smart TVs as well nowadays. And we're going to take a focused look especially on Android TV and their screen reader TalkBack. Here's a demo. All right, here is the screen reader on Android TV. It's called TalkBack, and it will focus things in the direction I press on the remote and hopefully announce the different elements on the screen. So let's take a listen.
Season 6 tab, selected, 6 of 8, navigate down to browse Season 6.
All right, so I'm in the Season tab panel here, but let's go up.
Episodes tab, selected, 1 of 2, navigate down to browse episodes.
All right, it announces that.
Watch again, Game of Thrones, Season 8, Episode 6, The Iron Throne, button, 1 of 4, navigate right for other actions, navigate up or down for more.
And it announces this is the play button, and I can resume and things like that from this. It said it was a button, so I know I can press it, and it said it was in a list of 4, and I can press up and down for more information about this show. That's a quick demo of a screen reader. All right, so that was the screen reader, and I'm using a remote to navigate this application, and I showed you some good examples there when it announced like things like buttons and tab panels, and that's make me understand like how this interface works. If it's a button, I know I can press it. If it's a tab panel, there's probably more panels, more tabs that I can choose from, and so on. That was great. But in many of these TV apps, unfortunately, there are a lot of issues, and they need to be fixed. Not just because the law says so, but also for me, right? Because I want to be able to find my accessible content or content at all. So I'm going to show you some of the most common issues that I find when I'm auditing or just, browsing and using these TV apps. All right, here is okay, so common issues. One of the most common issues that I find is that buttons that are not coded as buttons, that means they won't be announced as buttons, and that also then means I don't know if I can press or select it or whatever, So let's take a look.
Land.
So here I'm trying to go to left and to right to see what content this is, and it's not announced at all. So not buttons, no label, nothing. So I couldn't tell what was on that. And that's not the only issue. Sometimes they do announce buttons, but there are no labels instead, meaning I don't know what the button does.
Button. Press select to activate. 3 of 4, button. Press select to activate. 4 of 4, button. Press select to activate.
Yeah, so I knew there were 4 buttons, but I didn't know what they were doing because they just said button, 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 right? So that could be very difficult if you can't see the screen. Let's continue. We have incorrect labels. So sometimes there is a label, but you didn't test this maybe during development. And let's see this example.
In list, 123. Press select to activate. sc.svt.svtplay.ui.tv, search, keyboard entry $speech. Press select to activate. Unlabeled. Press select to activate. Unlabeled. Press select to activate. se.svt.svtplay.ui.tv. Search. Keyboard entry $space. Press select to activate.
Yeah.
se.svt.svtplay.ui.tv. Search. Keyboard entry $backspace. F. Press select to activate.
Yeah, hope I don't throw anyone under the bus here, but this is a very common thing that I see in many apps, especially when there are like just glyphs or icons in the button. You forget to label them properly for screen readers, and in this case, it just read the file name, I think, of the different buttons. So that can happen. I think we have maybe one more example of this.
2 of 8.
Byt paket.
1 of 8.
Byt paket.
Image. 2 of 8.
Byt paket.
Yeah.
Image. 3 of 8.
Byt paket.
Image.
Right. So I was trying to navigate one of these lists again, but in this case, they probably overwritten the original label, the content name, because they wanted to add that you have to change package to access this content, probably like the movie package or whatnot. But instead of adding the label to the name of the content, you probably accidentally overwritten the original name and just had change package, or something like that. All right. The navigation is important, but one other very important thing in TV apps is the video player itself. And I'm scrubbing back and forward in shows all the time. I'm looking for like my favorite scenes, or I missed something and I go back. So this is a very important feature. But on Disney Plus, not so much for me. Let's take a look. Okay, so here I am in the Disney Plus app, and I paused the video. Now I'm trying to fast forward.
Play. Timeline.
And it only says timeline on this scrubber. And if I press to the right, nothing happens. I mean, focus moves, but I don't fast forward. And I couldn't press select or OK button to go into a scrub mode, which you sometimes can, but not in Disney Plus. And there's also no buttons to fast forward. So yeah, I can't fast forward with TalkBack on. Yeah, so totally unable to fast forward in this app. And it's a very common thing in TV apps, because I find it that there are no basically a standard component or so in especially Android TV. So many apps had to do their own sort of implementation, and you do all the different apps does it differently. And yeah, so this is a very common issue across like all TV apps. And some try to figure out like a way around it instead of really solving the issue. So let me show you. So we have one app here that without screen reader on, you can use the timeline, the scrubber, like just by pressing right and left on your remote, and it works perfectly fine. But when the screen reader is on, the timeline doesn't work. But instead, they like listen or like reacts to if the screen reader is on and adds two buttons of skip backward, skip forward button. But these buttons skip forward 10 seconds, I think, if I remember correctly here. And if I'm watching a movie that's over 1 hour, I'm not gonna press the OK button so many times to go to the last or my favorite scene or whatever, to skip 10 seconds all the time. That's very tedious. So there are better ways to solve this. And I'm going to show you how Netflix has done it. And they've done a very good job with their player, I think. So here in the Netflix app, they have done things a little bit differently. And I think it's really great. First of all, I can use the scrub feature by just using the right and the left keys on the remote. And I can pause and play by pressing the OK button, just as people who are not using a screen reader does it. So
I am very
Playing.
sad about news that
25 minutes. Pause.
pausing, pressing
25
right arrow,
minutes.
I get this scrubbing feature.
Skipped forward.
can press-
36 seconds.
Okay,
Playing. 24.
and I can pause.
Paused. 24 minutes, 37 seconds remaining.
So that one works exactly as you expect it to do. Like I fast forward by just pressing the right arrow, and I pause by pressing the OK button. That's exactly what you want. Unfortunately, that's the only app that I've tried that works that well. So yeah, that's something we can talk more about later when we connect. Yeah, so we focused a lot here on Android TV. And the reason I've focused on that is this is the platform where we find the most issues when we're doing our different audits. I think it's because a lot of prioritization goes into the other platforms like the website, the mobile apps, and usually, sometimes at least, Apple TV as well. That's good for that you're thinking about accessibility. But sometimes it feels like at least that the Android TV app gets a little less development time or testing time. And why is that important? I mean, it's important because a lot of users actually have Android TV and using the Android TV app. The Android TV app, the Android TV operating system is built into a lot of TVs now. So like if you're buying a Sony TV and things like that, you get Android TV, and the apps you're downloading there is your Android TV app. And another group is people that buys like just a set-top box that you can get from your provider of sorts, and it's usually built on Android TV. And the other group can buy like Google's own Android TV streamer. And if we count all them together, it's like millions of users, and a lot of people of those have a disability. We usually count that around 15 to 25% of your user base have a disability. And yeah, so it's important for users, but also to be compliant. And according to the law, this has to be accessible. So what does the law say? Well, the European Accessibility Act. I'm not going to talk too much and too boring about the law, but I think it's important to understand that the European Accessibility Act, EAA, came into force this year, 2025, in June 28th. And they basically say that, let's see, it applies to all digital audiovisual services in the European Union. So if you have an audiovisual application, like a TV app, and you have customers and it's available in the EU, then your app has to be accessible according to the European Accessibility Act, right? And it covers all these different platforms, so website, mobile apps, and smart TV apps. So if you're making an Apple TV app, a website, an Android phone app, or Android TV app, you have to be accessible in all these different platforms, right? And it's enforced by national monitoring agencies. So in Sweden, for example, we have the PTS, Post- och telestyrelsen, and Mediamyndigheten, who is going to monitoring and audit these different services. PTS is going to monitor, because you're also, most TV apps have like a way to subscribe to it. So you have to pay to subscribe, right? And that means you're also an e-commerce because you're doing a transaction there. And so that's the PTS part of it. They are going to monitoring that payment flow. But Mediamyndigheten, at least in Sweden, is the one that's going to check all that content pages are accessible, right? So how do we get compliant? Well, the EAA, the European Accessibility Act, is built on, or you can lean on at least, a standard called the EN 301-549 and Web Content Accessibility Guideline, right? That's a lot there, I guess. But the EN standard is the European standard, so it should be the same all over Europe. And it also includes a section that refers to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG for short. And it basically has 50 plus criteria that you have to fulfill, I guess. So it's a lot there and more than we can get into during this webinar. But basically what it boils down to is that your TV apps needs to work with assistive technologies like screen readers that we talked about today. So it has to, none of those issues that we were looking at can exist because they are these criterias. Like a button need to be coded as a button, it has to be a label on the button. Those are different criterias from the WCAG, right? And if you're making a physical box or a TV, then there are other criteria for those as well. Like your physical device itself needs to be accessible, and the remote, you need to be able to feel the volume buttons, things like that. The packaging needs to be accessible. You need to be able to open it in an accessible way. There are guidelines for these things. And then there's the manual. You need to be able to understand the manual and be able to access it in an accessible way as well. It could be a website that's coded in an accessible way, so it works with screen readers. And then maybe also in the packaging, in the manual, in the packaging, you could have like a QR code or something like that leads the user to this accessible media, like the website. Things like that. There are more guidelines for that as well. And then there's the customer service part. That's also part of the law, that you need to train your customer service to support people who calls in and ask about the accessibility features. So the support team needs to know about all the features you have implemented that regards accessibility. Right? So yeah, I think these are the things we need to think of, but you need to think of how to lay the foundation of your accessibility work. I usually think of it as a pyramid. That's how I illustrated it here. And to really get a good foundation, we need to think about users first. So understanding users, that's the most important part. Otherwise, this whole pyramid will fall, I think. And by understanding users, I mean, like, do some user testing with people with disabilities that uses assistive technologies like screen readers. So you understand what's happening and how people think of like how they want to navigate in your app, right? And then I think it's a good idea to do an audit to see where are we right now on our website or our app. Is our app accessible? What parts are missing? So we know where to go next. And you also need to report all the issues that you get to these monitoring services according to the law. And that's also a thing you need to consider. And then you need to do some training, because it's important that your whole team understands how to work with accessibility. So you can do workshops on like how to use a screen reader themselves, so you can find these issues fast before they go out into production. You need to, understand how to code things that might be new to a lot of developers that you haven't coded for accessibility. So maybe you don't understand, like, how do I make this like a rectangle into a button? That's probably something you need to know if you haven't done it before. But one very important thing that to top this off is, of course, to change or get accessibility into the culture and your processes. So accessibility is always part of everyday work. But otherwise, it will be so much more expensive. But if you bake it into all the processes, it will be cheaper. And things like just onboarding when someone new comes into the team, let them know what the screen reader is, and then when they're coding or designing, they have that back in the back of their mind. So that's much cheaper and a very smart idea to work with accessibility. And of course, this is something that we can help you with. This is something I've helped a lot of different companies with, and this is my passion. And if you want our help, you can send an email to us at hello@accesslab.com or call us at +46 101 99 41 17, and you will get in contact. And that was the presentation. The end. Thank you very much.